Colorado Territory, 1873. Winter came early to Silverton, transforming the rugged mining town into a glittering fortress of ice and snow. Samuel Stanton squinted through the blinding white, urging his exhausted horse forward. At 25, he'd already lived several lifetimes' worth of hardship, each one etching deeper lines of distrust into his handsome face. The bitter cold couldn't compare to the chill he'd cultivated in his heart, a deliberate numbness that had kept him alive these past 3 years. Not much further, he murmured, patting the gelding's frost-coated neck. The snow swirled violently around them, obscuring the trail. Samuel's lean frame shuddered beneath his buckskin coat, his clean-shaven jaw clenched against the biting wind. He'd learned young that attachment was a liability on the frontier. Everyone he'd ever cared for had been taken, his parents to cholera, his brother to a Comanche raid, and Eliza. Well, that wound still bled whenever he let himself remember. The law of survival was simple: rely on no one, trust nothing but your own instincts, and never, ever put down roots. A drifting cowhand could survive where a man with ties would surely break. His gun and his horse were all the companionship a man needed in this untamed country. Love was a fantasy for fools and Easterners who'd never known real loss. Samuel had been riding 3 days straight from the cattle operation in Wyoming, chasing rumors of winter work at the silver mines. The unexpected blizzard had caught him halfway through the mountain pass, turning what should have been a day's journey into a desperate struggle for survival. The wind howled like a wounded beast, and visibility diminished to mere feet. Stumbled, his strength failing. Samuel's gloved hands had long gone numb on the reins. Death by freezing was a peculiarly peaceful way to go, they said. Perhaps this was how his story would end. Another nameless cowboy claimed by the merciless frontier, exactly as he'd always expected. Then he saw it. A faint golden glow through the whiteout. A window. Shelter. Samuel urged toward the light, and gradually a small cabin materialized from the blinding snow. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. He hadn't seen another soul in days, and the thought of human company brought equal measures of relief and dread. With stiff limbs, he dismounted and pounded on the door, prepared to offer payment for shelter, ready to move on once the storm passed. Attachment was for fools. Survival was the only goal. The door swung open. "Heaven above!" exclaimed a young woman, her blue eyes widening at the sight of him. "Come in before you freeze solid." Samuel stood transfixed. She was perhaps 20 years old, with honey blonde hair gathered in a simple braid and cheeks flushed from the hearth's warmth. Her calico dress was practical but well kept, with a woolen shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "I've a horse," he managed through chattering teeth. "Bring him around back to the lean-to," she instructed, already reaching for her coat. "Quickly now." 20 minutes later, was rubbed down and blanketed in the sheltered lean-to beside a placid mule, and Samuel sat before a crackling fire, his frozen fingers painfully returning to life as he clutched a tin cup of coffee. "You're lucky," the woman said, stirring something fragrant in an iron pot. "Another hour out there, and they'd find you come spring thaw." "I'm grateful for your hospitality, miss." "Tessa Wright," she replied. "And you are?" "Samuel Stanton. I'll pay for your trouble and be on my way once the storm breaks." She looked up from her cooking with an amused expression. "That might be a while. These mountain blizzards can last days." "Where were you headed?" "Silverton. Heard they need men at the mines." Tessa nodded. "You're not far off course, just about 5 miles west. But you won't find work there until this passes." As feeling returned to his extremities, Samuel observed his surroundings. The cabin was small but meticulously maintained. A single room with a curtained-off sleeping area, shelves lined with preserves, herbs hanging from the rafters, and a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. "You live here alone?" The question escaped before he could consider its impropriety. Tessa's face tightened momentarily. "Since my father passed last spring. He was the assayer for the Silver Queen mine." Samuel nodded, uncomfortable with the flash of shared understanding that passed between them, the recognition of loss. "I'm sorry for your intrusion, then, and for your loss." "Nonsense. Pa would never turn away a traveler in need, and neither will I." Her smile returned, bright and determined. "Now eat something before you waste away." The stew was simple but hearty: venison, potatoes, and carrots, the best meal Samuel had tasted in months. As they ate, the wind howled louder, rattling the shutters and driving snow against the windows in furious gusts. "Sounds like we're in for a long one," Tessa remarked, glancing toward the frost-covered glass. "You can take Pa's bed behind the curtain. I'll make up a pallet by the fire." Samuel shook his head firmly. "I'll take the floor, Miss Wright. I won't displace a lady from her comfort." Something flashed in her eyes, amusement, perhaps, at his chivalry. "As you wish, Mr. Stanton, though there's no one for 20 miles to question your honor or mine." The blizzard raged through the night, and Samuel slept fitfully on his makeshift bed near the hearth. Each time he woke, he found the fire freshly stoked and Tessa's curtain drawn. Despite his exhaustion, vigilance was a habit too deeply ingrained to abandon. 3 years of drifting had taught him that safety was temporary and kindness often masked ulterior motives. By morning, the cabin was half buried in snow, the world outside transformed into an alien landscape of white. Samuel's plan to continue on to Silverton evaporated with the realization that travel was impossible. "We're properly snowed in," Tessa announced after checking outside. "The drifts are taller than I am against the north wall." Samuel felt the familiar constriction in his chest, the trapped feeling that always drove him to move on. "I can dig us out." "You could try," she replied pragmatically, "but there's little point. The pass to Silverton will be impassable for days yet." She smiled at his evident discomfort. "Don't worry, Mr. Stanton. I've provisions enough for weeks, and you can earn your keep by helping with the chores." Over the following days, an uneasy routine developed. Samuel chopped wood, repaired loose shingles on the lean-to, and tended the animals. Tessa cooked, mended, and maintained the endless small tasks that kept the cabin functioning. They spoke little at first, but the silence gradually softened from awkward to companionable. On the 4th evening, as they sat before the fire, Tessa pulled out a worn deck of cards. "Do you play poker, Mr. Stanton?" Samuel raised an eyebrow. "I do, though I'm surprised a lady would suggest such a game." She laughed, a clear, bright sound that seemed to lighten the small cabin. "Living alone in the mountains allows certain freedoms from propriety. Besides, Pa taught me. Said I should know how to read men's faces in case I ever ventured into town." Samuel found himself smiling despite his reservations. A useful skill indeed. They played for matchsticks, and to Samuel's surprise, Tessa proved a formidable opponent. Her delicate features revealed nothing, and she bluffed with the confidence of a riverboat gambler. "Your father taught you well," he conceded after she won her 3rd hand. "Pa believed a woman alone needs more than just a shotgun for protection. Wits serve better than weapons most times." She shuffled the cards with practiced ease. "What about you, Mr. Stanton? Who taught you to survive?" The question caught him off guard. "The frontier is an effective teacher," he answered cautiously. "That's not an answer." Tessa's blue eyes fixed on his, unrelenting. Perhaps it was the isolation, or the strange intimacy forced upon them by the storm, but Samuel found himself speaking of things he rarely acknowledged. "My father was a rancher in Kansas Territory. Taught me and my brother everything about cattle, horses, and reading the land. After the war, we moved west for a fresh start. Cholera took my parents in '68. Comanche raid took my brother in '70. And you've been drifting since," she finished softly. Samuel nodded, uncomfortable with her perception. "It's safer that way." "Safer for whom?" Tessa challenged. The question hung between them, unanswered. As the days passed, the storm showed no sign of abating. Outside, the world remained a fortress of white, isolating them from everything except each other's company. Despite his determination to maintain emotional distance, Samuel found himself drawn to Tessa's quiet strength and unexpected wit. She was unlike any woman he'd encountered. Neither the fragile flowers of Eastern society nor the hardened survivors who occasionally crossed his path at frontier outposts. Tessa possessed a self-sufficiency born of necessity, yet retained a warmth that defied the harshness of her circumstances. On the 7th night, as they sat reading by lamplight, Samuel with a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans and Tessa with her father's journal, she suddenly asked, "Have you ever had a home, Mr. Stanton? Since losing your family, I mean." Samuel marked his place in the book and considered the question. "I've slept under the same stars for 3 years. That's home enough for a cowhand." "That's not a home," she countered. "That's just existing." "And what would you call this?" He gestured around the cabin. Living alone, miles from anywhere? Her chin lifted defiantly. I call it mine. Every board, every cup, every memory. It's where I belong, where I choose to be. Even alone. The question slipped out before he could stop it. Tessa's expression softened. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely, Mr. Stanton. Though I admit, the latter finds me occasionally. Something shifted between them that night. A crack in the carefully maintained distance. Samuel found himself watching Tessa as she moved about the cabin, noting the grace in her movements, the determination in her slender shoulders, the occasional flashes of vulnerability quickly hidden behind practicality. On the 10th day, the storm finally broke, leaving a crystalline blue sky and a blinding white landscape. Samuel stepped outside, breathing deeply of the crisp air, aware of a strange reluctance to leave that he refused to examine too closely. The path should be clear enough by tomorrow, he stated as Tessa joined him on the porch. Yes, she agreed, her expression unreadable. Though the mining operations won't start up again for at least a week. Samuel nodded, understanding her implicit invitation to stay longer. The sensible choice would be to continue to Silverton, to maintain the distance that had protected him for years. Yet the thought of returning to the loneliness of the trail held less appeal than it once had. Perhaps I could stay another day or two, he conceded. Help you clear the drifts from around the cabin. Tessa's smile was worth the compromise to his principles. That afternoon, as they worked together shoveling paths through the snow, disaster struck without warning. A tremendous crack echoed through the mountains, followed by a low rumble that grew rapidly to a roar. Avalanche, Samuel shouted, grabbing Tessa's arm. Get inside. They barely made it through the door before the wave of snow thundered past, missing the cabin but completely burying the lean-to where Dash and the mule were kept. The animals, Tessa cried, already reaching for a shovel. Samuel caught her arm. Wait, there could be a second slide. Let me go first. Together they frantically dug through the compressed snow, following the faint sounds of frightened animals. It took nearly an hour of desperate work before they broke through to the partially collapsed structure. By some miracle, both animals were alive, though trapped in a pocket of air created by fallen timber. As they led the shaken animals out, Samuel noticed blood streaming down Tessa's hand. You're hurt, he said, taking her hand in his. It's nothing, just a splinter from the broken beam. She tried to pull away, but he held firm, examining the deep sliver embedded in her palm. Let me help you, he insisted, guiding her back to the cabin where he carefully removed the splinter with his pocket knife, cleaned the wound, and bandaged her hand with a gentleness that surprised them both. Thank you, she whispered, her face inches from his as he tied off the bandage. Samuel found himself trapped in her gaze, unable to retreat behind his usual walls. The fear he'd felt when the avalanche struck, not for himself, but for her, had shattered something fundamental in his defenses. That night, neither could sleep. They sat before the fire, the near tragedy having stripped away pretense. I was engaged once, Samuel found himself saying. Back in Kansas. Eliza was the daughter of a neighboring rancher. We grew up together, planned a life together. After my parents died, she was all I had left. Tessa waited silently for him to continue. When the Comanche attacked, they took her. My brother and I went after them. We found her 2 days later. Samuel's voice thickened. She'd been violated, tortured. She lived just long enough to die in my arms. My brother was killed in the fight that followed. Oh, Samuel, Tessa whispered, using his given name for the first time. I swore then that I'd never put down roots again, never give fate another hostage. He stared into the fire. The frontier takes everything you love, sooner or later. Tessa moved to sit beside him, her uninjured hand finding his. The frontier gives as well as takes, Samuel. It gives strength, purpose, beauty for those willing to see it. How can you believe that, after losing your father, living alone in these mountains? Because the alternative is to surrender to bitterness, she replied simply. And I refuse to give hardship that power over me. Her words struck him like physical blows, challenging the philosophy that had governed his existence for years. You're very brave, Tessa Wright, he said softly. She smiled, her eyes reflecting firelight. No braver than a man who risks his life for a stranger's animals. Before Samuel could respond, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. a brief, feather-light touch that nonetheless shook him to his core. Then she rose and disappeared behind her curtain, leaving him with turbulent thoughts and an unfamiliar hope stirring beneath his ribs. The avalanche had altered more than the landscape. The road to Silverton was now completely impassable, buying them weeks rather than days together. Samuel found himself grateful for the enforced companionship, even as it terrified him. Each day spent in Tessa's presence eroded his carefully constructed isolation. They settled into a routine, hunting together when weather permitted, reading aloud by the fire in the evenings, sharing stories of their pasts. Samuel discovered that Tessa had come west with her father after her mother's death, leaving behind a comfortable life in Boston for the uncertainty of the Colorado silver boom. "Weren't you afraid?" he asked one evening. "Terrified," she admitted. "But Pa needed the fresh start, and I needed my father. So I learned to shoot, to cook over an open fire, to identify or samples, to survive winters like this one." "Your father would be proud of what you've become," Samuel said, meaning it. Tessa's smile was tinged with sadness. "He wanted more from me than this solitary existence. Before he died, he made me promise I'd consider returning east to my mother's family. Will you go?" The question felt like tearing open his own chest. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "This is my home, but sometimes I wonder if I'm merely hiding here." The understanding between them deepened with each passing day. Samuel found himself sharing jokes that had remained untold for years, laughing at Tessa's sharp observations, admiring her resilience as she tackled the endless work of mountain survival without complaint. One bright morning, they ventured farther from the cabin than usual, checking Samuel's trap lines. The snow-covered landscape glittered like diamonds beneath the winter sun, breathtaking in its pristine beauty. "It's like we're the only two people in the world," Tessa remarked, her breath clouding before her. Samuel found himself studying her profile, the delicate line of her jaw, the flush of cold on her cheeks, the quiet determination in her expression. "Would that be so terrible?" he asked. She turned to him, surprised. "I thought isolation was your preference, Mr. Stanton. Perhaps my preferences are changing, Miss Wright." Her smile warmed him more than any fire could have. That evening, as they returned to the cabin laden with 2 rabbits and a pine marten, they found unexpected tracks in the snow, human footprints leading to their door. Samuel's hand went instinctively to his gun. "Stay behind me," he whispered, all his old caution resurfacing. They approached carefully, but before they reached the cabin, the door opened to reveal a middle-aged man in a sheriff's badge. "Miss Wright, thank the Lord," the man called out. "When we didn't see smoke from your chimney after the avalanche, we feared the worst." "Sheriff Davis," Tessa responded, visibly relieved. "We're fine." The avalanche missed the cabin. The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he assessed Samuel. "And who might this be?" "Samuel Stanton," Tessa explained. "He was caught in the blizzard. We've been snowed in together since." Sheriff Davis's expression darkened slightly. "Have you indeed? Well, Mr. Stanton, you should know that Miss Wright's reputation is highly valued in Silverton. Her father was a respected man." Before Samuel could respond, Tessa stepped forward. "Sheriff, Mr. Stanton has been a perfect gentleman and has saved both my animals and quite possibly my life. I won't have you implying otherwise." The sheriff seemed taken aback by her forceful defense. "I meant no offense, Miss Wright. Just looking out for your welfare, as your father would have wanted." "Then you can tell everyone in town that I am perfectly well," she replied firmly. Sheriff Davis tipped his hat. "I'll do that. The pass to town should be clear enough in a week or so, if you need supplies." He glanced at Samuel again. "Or company." After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell between them. The outside world had intruded on their private sanctuary, bringing with it all the complications of society and reputation. "I'm sorry about that," Tessa finally said. "Sheriff Davis has appointed himself my guardian since Pa died." Samuel nodded, his expression guarded. "He's right to be concerned." "Your reputation, my reputation is my own concern," she interrupted fiercely. "I won't have my life dictated by small-town gossip." "Nevertheless," Samuel continued carefully, "my presence here compromises you. Perhaps I should leave when the path clears." Tessa's eyes flashed with hurt before she masked it. "If that's what you wish." That night, for the first time since his arrival, true distance yawned between them. They ate in silence, each lost in private thoughts. Samuel felt the familiar urge to run, to protect himself from the pain of caring, to shield Tessa from the inevitable suffering his presence would bring. He slept poorly, haunted by memories of Eliza's broken body, of his brother's unseeing eyes. The frontier took everything, eventually. That was the one truth he knew. Morning brought no clarity. Samuel rose early and went outside to chop wood, working furiously as if physical exertion could resolve his internal conflict. He was still at it when Tessa emerged from the cabin, her face pale but resolved. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. Samuel set down the axe, bracing himself. "When my father died, he left me more than this cabin. He left me his share in the Silver Queen mine, a 15% stake." She took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is that I'm not some helpless woman who needs protection from gossip or scandal. I have means, position, choices." Samuel stared at her, processing this revelation. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand that if I ask you to stay, it's not out of desperation or fear of being alone. It's because I choose to." The directness of her gaze left no room for misinterpretation. "Tessa, you're afraid," she continued relentlessly. "Afraid of caring because you've lost everyone. I understand that fear better than you know. But hiding from life isn't living, Samuel. It's just a slower kind of dying." Her words struck with devastating accuracy, exposing the false belief that had governed his existence for years. He turned away, unable to face the truth she offered. "The frontier doesn't just take, Samuel. It also gives. It gave me you." When he didn't respond, she returned to the cabin, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the mountain silence. That evening, a new storm blew in, not a blizzard this time, but a freezing rain that coated everything in a deadly sheath of ice. They spoke little as they secured the animals and prepared for another night of confinement. Samuel was checking the cabin's rear window when he heard Tessa gasp. He turned to find her staring at a letter she'd pulled from her father's old desk. "What is it?" he asked, concerned by her expression. It's a letter from my father to the mine's manager," she answered, her voice unsteady. "Written the day before he died." Samuel waited as she read further, her face growing increasingly pale. "He suspected embezzlement," she finally said. "He was gathering proof that the manager was falsifying assay reports and siphoning off silver. That's why he went to the mine that night, to check the records." She looked up, her eyes wide. "The night he supposedly fell down a shaft in an accident." Samuel crossed to her, taking the letter from her trembling hands. "You think he was murdered? It would explain why he went alone, after dark. Why he didn't tell anyone where he was going." Her voice strengthened with conviction. "Samuel, my father didn't fall. He was pushed." The implications crystallized instantly. If Tessa was right, her father's killer was still in Silverton, perhaps the very man managing her inheritance. And if the murderer learned that evidence existed. "We need to secure this letter," Samuel said urgently. "And we need to be prepared. If the manager suspects a crash from outside interrupted him." Samuel extinguished the lamp immediately, plunging the cabin into darkness. "Get down," he whispered, drawing his revolver. Away from the windows. They crouched in silence, listening intently. Footsteps crunched on the ice-covered snow, circling the cabin. "Tessa Wright," called an unfamiliar male voice. "We know you're in there. Open up, we're here to help." Samuel shook his head warningly when Tessa moved to respond. "Miss Wright, it's Barton Jenkins from the mine," the voice continued. "Sheriff sent us to check on you after this ice storm." "He's lying," Tessa whispered. "Jenkins is the manager, the one in the letter." Samuel nodded grimly. "They must have been watching. Saw the sheriff visit, worried about what he might have told you." The sound of splintering wood came from the rear of the cabin as someone tried to force the back door. "We're surrounded," Samuel realized. At least 3 men from the sound of it. He gripped Tessa's shoulder. "Is there anywhere to hide the letter? Somewhere they wouldn't look?" "The loose floorboard under my bed," she answered without hesitation. "Pa's old hiding place." "Go," he urged. "I'll hold them off." As Tessa scrambled to hide the evidence, Samuel positioned himself where he could cover both doors. The odds were terrible, him against unknown numbers, with Tessa to protect and no clear escape route. The back door gave way with a crash. Samuel fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "That's far enough," he shouted. "The lady and I are armed, and the next bullet won't miss." A tense silence followed. broken only by the sound of men conferring in hushed voices outside. "No need for gunplay, Mr. Jenkins called eventually. "We're just checking on Miss Wright's welfare after hearing about her house guest." "She's just fine," Samuel replied evenly. "And thankful for your concern, though calling out before breaking in might have been more neighborly." More whispered conference outside. Samuel used the moment to reload, his mind racing through limited options. He couldn't hold them off indefinitely, and once they realized who Tessa was harboring, they'd have even more reason to silence them both. Tessa reappeared at his side, her father's shotgun in hand. "Secret safe?" she whispered. "But we can't stay here. They'll burn us out if they have to." "I know," Samuel acknowledged. "Is there anywhere we can go? Any way out they might not know about?" "The old mining tunnel," she answered immediately. "Pa and I dug it as an emergency exit after being snowed in one winter. It comes out in the aspen grove about 200 yards east." Hope flickered. "Is it clear? Passable?" "It should be. I checked it in the fall." Her expression was determined despite her fear. "But they'll know we've gone as soon as we stop answering." Samuel thought rapidly. "We need a distraction. Something to buy us time to get through the tunnel and away." Tessa nodded, then moved purposefully to the shelf where she kept household chemicals. "Pa taught me a trick for scaring off bears," she said, mixing potassium nitrate from her father's assaying supplies with sugar in a small tin. "It makes a tremendous smoke." Understanding dawned. "A smoke diversion. We set it off, they think the cabin's on fire, and rush in while we slip out the tunnel," she finished, working quickly. Outside, the men were growing impatient. "Miss Wright, we're coming in now. Don't want anyone getting hurt." Samuel fired another warning shot through the window. "Stay back. Next one finds flesh." The mixture prepared, Tessa positioned it near the front door with a slow-burning fuse made from twisted paper. "This will give us about 2 minutes before it really starts smoking," she explained. "Let's move," Samuel urged, keeping his gun trained on the door as they backed toward the hidden tunnel entrance beneath a trapdoor under the kitchen table. Tessa lit the fuse, then hurried to join Samuel. Together they moved the table, opened the trapdoor, and descended into the narrow, earthen passage. Above them, they heard confused shouts as smoke began pouring from the cabin windows. The tunnel was a tight fit, barely high enough to crouch walk through, supported by timber bracing every few feet. They moved as quickly as possible in the darkness, guided only by touch and Tessa's memory. Behind them, the sounds of men breaking into the cabin grew faint. Their diversion had worked, for now. "Where does this tunnel come out exactly?" Samuel whispered. "In a hollow aspen stump," Tessa replied. "About half a mile downslope from the main trail to Silverton. And from there." She hesitated. "Silverton's our only option. We need the sheriff, need to show him the letter. Jenkins won't dare move against us openly in town." Samuel wasn't so sure, but they had few alternatives. Traveling cross-country in winter would be suicide without proper supplies. After what seemed an eternity of hunched crawling, they reached the tunnel's end, a crude wooden hatch built into what had once been a massive aspen. Samuel carefully pushed it open, scanning for any sign of pursuit before helping Tessa out. The world outside was transformed by the ice storm. Every branch, every needle encased in crystal that gleamed in the moonlight. Beautiful and deadly. "We need to move fast," Samuel said, helping Tessa orient herself. "Which way to the trail?" She pointed west, where the land sloped more gently toward the valley. "We stay in the trees as long as possible, then cut across to the main road." They set off at a careful jog, the ice-crusted snow crunching beneath their boots. Every sound seemed magnified in the frozen night, every shadow potentially concealing their pursuers. They had covered perhaps a quarter-mile when gunshots echoed behind them. They found the tunnel, Samuel realized grimly. Tessa stumbled, fear momentarily overwhelming her, but Samuel caught her arm. "Keep moving. We've got a head start." They increased their pace, abandoning stealth for speed. The trees thinned as they approached the valley floor, offering less concealment but easier passage. "There's the road," Tessa gasped, pointing to where moonlight reflected off the icy track ahead. They had almost reached it when a bullet splintered a tree trunk inches from Samuel's head. He shoved Tessa down into a shallow depression beside the trail. "Stay down," he ordered, returning fire to give their pursuers pause. In the silver moonlight, he could make out 3 figures advancing through the trees about 100 yards back. They had the advantage of numbers and ammunition, while Samuel had limited bullets and a woman to protect. Samuel, Tessa said urgently, there's a mining shack about half a mile down this road. We can make it if we run now. He nodded, helping her up. Go. I'll cover you, then follow. No, she protested. Together or not at all. There was no time to argue. Samuel fired 2 more shots toward their pursuers. Then they ran, slipping and sliding on the icy road, fully exposed. Bullets kicked up snow around them, but the ice and darkness made accurate shooting impossible for their pursuers. Samuel and Tessa pushed on, lungs burning in the frigid air. The mining shack appeared as Tessa had promised, a tumble-down structure that had once housed equipment for a played-out claim. They crashed through the door, slamming it behind them. Help me barricade this, Samuel gasped, already dragging a heavy workbench against the door. Together they secured the entrance. Then Samuel examined their shelter. The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small window on each side and the remains of mining equipment scattered about. It won't hold them for long, he admitted, checking his ammunition. 3 bullets remaining. But it gives us time to think. Tessa sank onto an overturned crate, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. They'll kill us if they catch us, she said quietly. They killed my father. They won't hesitate. Samuel knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. I won't let that happen, he promised. We'll make it to Silverton. We'll expose what they've done. She looked into his eyes, seeing past his brave words to the fear beneath. Why are you still here, Samuel? You could have left weeks ago. You could run now. They want me, not you. The question stripped away his final defenses. Because for the first time in 3 years, I found something worth staying for. Worth fighting for. He swallowed hard. Worth living for. Tessa's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Even knowing it might end badly? That the frontier takes everything, eventually? Even then, he answered, the truth of it resonating in his bones. Because you were right, it gives as well as takes. And what it's given me and you is worth any risk. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. Then we fight together. A shout from outside interrupted their moment. Jenkins and his men had found them. Stanton, right. Come out now, and maybe you'll live to see morning. Samuel moved to the window, keeping low. 3 of them spread out. They're trying to surround us. Tessa joined him, peering cautiously through the dirty glass. If we can hold until dawn, someone might come along the road. A miner or a supply wagon. That's a big if, Samuel warned. But we don't have many options. The standoff continued through the bitter hours of the night. Occasionally one of the men would fire at the shack, more to keep them on edge than with any real hope of hitting them. Samuel rationed his remaining bullets, firing only when one of their attackers grew bold enough to approach. As the eastern sky began to lighten, Jenkins called out again, his voice revealing increasing desperation. Last chance, right? The letter for your lives. We know you have it. Tessa and Samuel exchanged glances. They don't know it's still at the cabin, she whispered. They think we brought it with us. Which means they haven't found it yet, Samuel realized. We still have leverage. A new plan formed rapidly. Tessa, I need you to negotiate with them. Tell them you'll trade the letter for safe passage to Silverton. But we don't have it, she objected. They don't know that, he countered. And while you're talking, I can work my way around behind them. She grasped his sleeve. That's too dangerous. They'll kill you on sight. Not if they're focused on you and the letter. He touched her cheek gently. Trust me, Tessa. We can do this together. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Jenkins, she called out. I have my father's letter. I'll trade it for our safe passage to Silverton. While Jenkins shouted back his demands, Samuel slipped out through the rear window. The pre-dawn light cast long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, providing some cover as he circled wide around the shack. He moved silently, using every skill honed through years of frontier survival. Through gaps in the trees, he could see 2 men positioned in front of the shack, with Jenkins presumably on the side nearest the road. Samuel crept closer, his breath fogging in the frigid air. He could hear Tessa continuing the negotiation, playing for time, demanding guarantees that Jenkins had no intention of honoring. He was within 20 feet of the nearest gunman when a branch snapped beneath his boot. The man spun, raising his rifle. Samuel fired without hesitation, dropping the assailant with his second-to-last bullet. The other man by the shack turned at the sound, but before he could locate Samuel, Tessa fired through the window with her father's shotgun, forcing him to dive for cover. "Jenkins!" Samuel shouted, advancing with his revolver aimed. "It's over. Throw down your gun." Jenkins emerged from behind a boulder, his face contorted with rage and fear. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, raising his pistol. Samuel's final bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Jenkins stumbled but remained standing, swinging his gun towards Samuel with murderous intent. Before he could fire, the crack of a rifle echoed through the valley. Jenkins collapsed, blood blossoming across his chest. Samuel whirled to face this new threat, only to see Sheriff Davis emerging from the tree line with 2 deputies. "Thought you folks might need some assistance," the sheriff called, lowering his rifle. Miss Tessa's smoke signal was visible for miles. Relief washed over Samuel as Tessa burst from the shack, running toward him. He caught her in his arms, holding her tightly as the tension of the night drained away. "You came back for me," she whispered against his chest. "Everyone else leaves, but you came back." "Always," he promised, understanding in that moment that his heart's long winter had finally thawed. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of depositions and revelations. Jenkins had indeed murdered Tessa's father to conceal his embezzlement scheme. 2 of his co-conspirators were arrested, while the third, the man Samuel had shot, would stand trial once he recovered. Tessa's letter provided the final evidence needed to unravel the entire operation. Nearly $30,000 in stolen silver was recovered, and Tessa's stake in the mine was secured. Through it all, Samuel remained by her side, his presence a steady anchor amidst the chaos. The town of Silverton, initially scandalized by their living arrangement during the blizzard, gradually embraced the romantic tale of the drifting cowboy and the mining heiress thrown together by fate and united by danger. On a bright spring morning, with the last of the winter's snow melting from the mountainsides, Samuel stood on the porch of Tessa's cabin, their cabin now, watching her tend to the young vegetable seedlings in her garden. He fingered the small box in his pocket, considering all that had changed in the months since a blizzard had driven him to her door. The man who had arrived that night no longer existed. That hollow shell had been replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from isolation, but from the courage to love despite the risks. "You're staring," Tessa called, looking up from her work with earth-smudged hands and a smile that still took his breath away. "Just admiring the view," he replied, walking down to join her among the freshly turned earth. She brushed a strand of honey-blonde hair from her face. "Did you check on the new calf?" "Healthy as can be. Mare's doing fine too." Samuel had used part of the reward money from capturing Jenkins' accomplices to start a small horse breeding operation on the land adjacent to the cabin. It wasn't the drifting cowboy's life he'd once known, but he'd discovered that putting down roots brought its own kind of freedom. Tessa studied his face, sensing his contemplative mood. "What is it, Samuel? You've been distracted all morning." He took her hands in his, dirt and all. "I've been thinking about what you told me during that first blizzard, about the frontier giving as well as taking." He swallowed, suddenly nervous despite the certainty in his heart. "It gave me you when I thought I'd never find home again." Understanding dawned in her eyes as he dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Tessa Wright, I came here believing that the only way to survive this wild land was to remain alone, untethered, protected from loss." He drew the small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "You showed me that a life without love isn't survival at all. Will you marry me? Build this frontier life with me, whatever it brings." Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to gather her in his arms, lifting her off the ground in his exuberance. Their laughter echoed across the mountainside, a joyful sound in a place that had known too much sorrow. That summer, they were married beneath the aspen trees where they had fled on that desperate winter night. Sheriff Davis gave the bride away, and half of Silverton turned out to witness the union. As Samuel spoke his vows, he looked into Tessa's shining eyes and felt the last frozen piece of his heart finally melt away. The frontier had taken much from him: family, love, hope. But in Tessa, it had given everything back 100-fold. "Samuel," Take you, Tessa, to be my lawfully wedded wife, he said, his voice steady with conviction. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. And in that moment, surrounded by the wild beauty of the Colorado mountains and the woman who had taught him to live again, Samuel Stanton understood that some things, the most important things, the frontier could never take away.